moment he landed the Farfarer, Renato had a rare feeling of regret. It's not too late, he thought. He could turn around and sail for Zenobia's island. He frowned. Wait a minute. He didn't want to kill Zenobia, did he? Sure, technically she was the enemy, but they'd been at Sword Fu school together. They'd never been lovers, but somehow they'd been closer. She'd told him every secret about herself. Except the biggest one. That she was the Emperor's daughter. No. Kill Zenobia, whispered the stone. Before it's too late.
This is yours, said Renato, but he couldn't hear his enemy's answer. Renato had been the terror of the sandcastles when he was 2. There was something sour in the air. Like the earth had ruptured over something that had been fermenting for a very long time. Renato hated gogglers, but it freaked him out to cut them. The stone hadn't lied about what it could do for him. With each raven he cut down, he felt a jolt of power flowing into his arm. You're weak, whispered the stone. The Gorman will kill you. Are you afraid of it? No, don't be ridiculous. It chuckled. But it's unstable. It will poison you if so much as carry it, and if you try to use it, it will explode catastrophically. Renato did not trust rocks that talked in his head. He went onwards. Once you try it, you're hooked. The rock felt hot in his hand. He could feel its secret power.
This couldn't be good for global warming. As he approached the core, the stone became hysterical.
No, it's too much power. We'll rip a hole in space and time.
He had a sudden vision of plunging his gauntlet into the core and dying in anguish. That wasn't his vision, was it? The stone had sent him its darkest fears, hadn't it? He had a sudden impulse to do exactly that. He raised his right fist and plunged it into the core. There was a rush of light. He thought he could hear the stone screaming. And then he passed out. When Renato came to, the core was gone. But the Iblis stone was no longer black, but glowing with a blue light. And it was silent. "I can't hear you," he sang out, and "Yoo-hoo!" It didn't answer. "Ha!" he said. He had defeated the demonic gem with the power of his mind. He felt invincible. It was time to attack the Imperial outpost on the Nexus. Take the battle to the enemy. But among the huge crystals, there was also an observatory. A wise man would probably ask the scientists exactly what he had first. How wise was he? As the Farfarer made its way toward the Nexus, Renato could see tiny sparks in the blackness that was the Iblis stone, as if somewhere within it, the core was still spitting out energy, which the Iblis stone sucked in hungrily. You'd think the stone would want this kind of power, wouldn't it? Thought Renato. Well, the scientists would explain it all. See? He'd trusted his gut, and it had worked out. That's what it meant to be a hero. To ignore the naysayers and the odd-makers, and do what you knew was right, and have it turn out to be the right thing. Well, he wasn't worried. Once he got to the observatory, the scientist toads could explain it. Then he could carry the war into the enemy's camp and destroy them all. Oh dear, he was getting a little bloodthirsty, wasn't he? Renato wondered idly if people who had built these poles had really, really long tentacles.
was blood on this one, so it hadn't saved its owner.
Bernardo had never felt better in his life. Normally, a battle would wear him down and he would need a night's sleep. Now he felt like he could go all night and all day. He felt like people were cheering him on, and he could practically hear their applause as he slew one raven after another.
The Imperial fleet was closing in on the rebels, forcing them to come out and fight. Bernardo was itching to bring the fight to the enemy. He had to remind himself. The toads at the observatory measured the stone with their occult devices. I fed it the core of Skyripper, explained Renato. No more feed me blood and souls.
But the core is not an unlimited energy source,
said one toad. Another said,
there's a feedback loop, you see, which could overload the stone.
Yeah, the stone doesn't actually feed on souls,
claimed a third.
But on pain of killing another sentient being. If you can truly be at peace with yourself, it would not overload.
This was all very confusing. At peace? Yes, the mountains were peaceful and quiet, but he now had the power to turn the tides. He should report to the Rebellion Council and prepare for the decisive battle. Couldn't make sense of anything the toads said, and listening to them argue made him restless. The Iblis Stone had made him a power in his own right. The core had kicked the Iblis Stone out of his head by filling it with more power than it could eat. It was time to meet the leadership of the rebellion. It was time to go to the ruins where they had hidden their secret base. He was ready for anything the ravens could throw at him. His sword felt ready too. It seemed to know what he wanted most. Smashing things was fun. This is quite the view, he thought. Traitors! Called the ravens. Renato wondered if his future self had commissioned these poles. Renato had once invested in a jewel store, but had lost money because someone kept robbing it. Twist. It was him.
almost fun. Pain of killing another sentient being? What was that toad talking about anyway? He felt no pain, only pleasure as each filthy raven fell by his sword and the stone glowed brighter and brighter. Long stairs. So he was close to the rebel base. Nothing was on fire. So far, so good. Newly remembered knowledge. Needed to focus. It was good to practice your moves, thought Renato. Keeps you limber. He slew and slew across the ruins and into the labyrinth that hid the secret rebel base. He was surprised not to see any defenders or even any of the council toads. When he reached the council chambers, there were still no toads, only filthy ravens. "Stop him! He's gone mad!" One raven shouted until he had hacked them all down. There was not a single toad anywhere. No doubt they'd all been taken prisoner, so it was up to him to take revenge upon the Imperial fleet. But where had they taken the council? It couldn't be good that the Empire had not only found the secret rebel base, but killed or captured everyone there, no matter. He was on a roll. He headed full speed towards the Imperial fleet. He would be the fox who took down 100 warships. He charged. The Imperial fleet was huge and deadly. But he was deadlier. The crowd was cheering him on. He could practically hear it. "Renato, the hero of the rebellion!"
What's there?
That could come in handy in a pinch.
As he slew his way across the fleet, Renato thought he could hear a small voice whispering in his ear.
Look at your gauntlet, you idiot, it said.
Oh, for heaven's sake, he thought. Can't I be alone in my own head? Look at the stone. I'm busy, he told the voice. Talk later. And it will be too late, cried the voice. Don't be so bloody thick. Piss off, he told the voice and kept up his slaying.
There had to be something useful in these things, didn't there?
Good thing Renato didn't have vertigo.
There was the Emperor. Renato cut down his elite guard. The exalted Toad cowered fearfully. He had sought to evade death and only made death come to him faster. Renato savored the moment. And then, too quick, it was over. He stood over the dead Emperor.
Death to tyranny! He shouted. Go, House, go! Zenobia stepped out of the shadows. You have to stop, she said. You've killed everyone. Our ravens, your rebels. You murdered the whole rebel council. What? Oh, the ravens killed the council. Yeah, big idiot. They don't even know what the secret base is. Shouted Lapino, who was with her for some reason. Look at the stone, said Zenobia. It was black as night. Blacker. But I fed it the core, said Renato. It was glowing. Well, who needs a core, he said, and he attacked. Zenobia conjured her best, and Lapino hopped around like a mad rabbit, but he killed them both easily. I am unstoppable, he orated at the blood-soaked walls. I alone shall be emperor. The tiny voice inside him screamed. That doesn't even sound like you big fanny. The stone has stolen your mind.
But he ignored it. Who listens to voices in their heads anyway? Madmen, that's who. And just like that, he was alive again, and back on the Farfarer, still fleeing burning Ubar. The book was still open before him. So, the book was a portal. It took you to the future, when your destinies would branch. He had failed and died 3 times, but he'd learned another true thing. The Iblis Stone was evil. It would try to corrupt anyone who used it. As he set foot on the island, Bernardo couldn't help feeling a bit curious. Was Lapino still waiting to be rescued? No. He was probably drinking champagne with the ravens. Did ravens drink champagne? Did rabbits? Bernardo felt oddly thirsty, come to think of it. Why had he chosen the Skyripper? Bernardo never made plans that required constant vigilance. He was a hero. He didn't think too much. He just went with his gut and hoped it all worked out. The Skyripper was a long shot. He'd have to devote himself to it. No side journeys, no rescuing old friends. That was against his nature. Could he stick with it? Two eyes good. One eye dead.
Do this again sometime.
Renato was running out of choices. Zenobia's love brought him only sorrow. His best friend was his enemy. And the Iblis Stone... Ooh, he shuddered. Best not to think about it. All that was left was the Skyripper, a weapon powered by a god's eye. So be it, then. Had that door been opened before? Everyone knew how to use magical gems. Of course, not everyone had magical gem gauntlets like he did. spectacularly well, thought Renato.
The ravens. Nobody said they were original. Renato chuckled. It was the same puzzle. He wished he had his friends here, so he could amaze them. There it was. Skyripper's Armature. The stuff that dreams are made of. Engineers' dreams, anyway.
The device was intricate. No one alive had the skill to make a thing like it. How was it part of a weapon at all? He'd have to ask a scientist. But first, he'd get the second piece. Skyripper had a heart. A core that had come to rest on the next island. Well, there was another island he could reach. Zenobia had just invaded it with her father's Raven battalions. She must be encamped there still. But fighting Zenobia now, that made no sense at all. He'd already sacrificed one friend to get this armature, was it? He didn't need to hurry to face her. She would find him. A no-brainer. He'd sacrificed his old friend Lapino to get the armature. And the armature was useless by itself, only a series of coils and wheels. War demanded sacrifices, and he would make more before the end. He would have to choose the greatest good no matter how much it cost him. Zenobia. Well, he would see her sooner or later, across a battlefield or a sword's point before all this was over. He was sure of that. The power was in the core. Obviously, he had to get the core.
Doubt sunk in before he was even out of sight of the Farfarer. Why had he chosen the Skyripper? It was the sort of path he'd always avoided. The path of responsibility, of seriousness. Had he grown up? He didn't feel grown up. He'd made this decision from his gut, like he always did. Somehow, he'd impulsively decided to stop being impulsive. Did that make any sense? He wished there were more pylons he could use the hook on. They really needed to construct additional pylons.
It was time for a little exploration. Renato had been to a dungeon once where all the chests had teeth and eyes. It had been a short visit. Personal space? There was something sour in the air. Like the earth had ruptured over something that had been fermenting for a very long time. Hey, why don't you guys fight in groups? Oh, I know. 'Cause there's no I in team. Only let you through if they think you're hot enough. His sword food teacher used to say power gems were cheating. Stupid old fart. There were fewer and fewer trees. There were only these huge crystalline growths. Had those been here before? He no longer heard birds except for the feverish cawing of the ravens when they attacked. He couldn't smell the small animals of the forest, the mice and rabbits. Where had they gone? And he was getting hungry, too. This was an unhealthy place to be. Of course there was a puzzle. You couldn't expect the Transcendent Emperor to bury a god's eye in a leather sack where anyone could pick it up.
20-sided core made him feel physically sick. Once he had sneaked into a temple of the dark art, and he hadn't liked what he smelt and saw there. This felt like that. As quick as he could, he wrangled the icosahedron into the armature. The wheels began to spin, then glow. The sick feeling quickly spun away. Now he only felt sad. He had lost good friends for this war apparatus.
Maybe Lapino wasn't such a good friend. Yeah, that made him feel better. He carried his prize back to the Farfarer. Now, he had to make his next move.
There was a key Imperial outpost on the Nexus. If this really was some sort of super weapon, he could use it to wreak havoc on the enemy. And if it wasn't, well, better to know that before the final battle. But maybe he should show it to some scientists first. There was an observatory on the Nexus. Maybe he should go there before he fired it. Renato had never been much of a student. At Swordfu School, he'd never read the books, just looked at the pictures. And Zenobia. But weapons he understood. His gut told him that the Skyripper would work great. He would use it to take out the Imperial outpost. And what's the worst that could happen? The thing wouldn't work, and then he'd take it to the scientists. Right? Exactly. As he set out down the path, Renato wondered why the parts of the Skyripper had only surfaced now, thousands of years after the Transcendent Emperor had discarded it. This Emperor, Isengrim III, had performed terrible, bloodthirsty rituals to invoke the lost gods. Perhaps that was bringing up lost artifacts. How perfect, then, that the Skyripper would reappear to be his distraction. These platforms were great. Renato wanted one for his house.
Guys fix for life insurance. Always a rush. He was tired of slaughtering ravens. Maybe it was time to test out the new weapon. He turned a knob on the Skyripper. It made strange, mechanical noises. The wheels spun faster. It began to hum. The Skyripper was following his every step. At least it acknowledged him as the master. But there was no trigger. How was he supposed to fire it? Fire, he said. Nothing happened. Well, maybe it just needed to warm up. After all, it hadn't been fired in thousands of years.
When Renato went to the china shop, for some reason the owner was always nervous. The Skyripper was making a whining noise now, and its wheels were spinning so fast he could no longer see them.
Renato had a thought. "Please?" he asked. The Skyripper began to glow. Boom! The outpost burst into flame.
Ravens flapped out screaming, wings on fire. The base was his. The far speaker toad came hopping out.
Renato,
It croaked, sounding like a toad version of Zenobia.
don't use the Skyripper. It will destroy the world.
Yeah, sure it will, cracked Renato. Pull the other one.
If you don't trust me, go see Calaveras.
That sounded sensible. Why did she always have to sound sensible all the time? Oh, it was infuriating.
Of course she would say that. He was supposed to hurry and bring the Skyripper to the council so the rebels could actually win the war. But what if she was right?
Damn it. Just this once, he would not let Zenobia get into his head with her logic and her wisdom and her appeals to reason. He was a fox. He'd go with his instincts, and it would all work out like it always did. Oh, he was sounding like a reckless idiot even to himself. But if there was one thing Renato could never bring himself to do, it was turn back on a decision he'd made. Imperials were flapping and cawing all around the ruins. They must be panicking with rumors flying of the superweapon. Maybe they hoped to find and destroy the base before he could put the Skyripper into action. The Skyripper was whining and heating up. It would be time to use that energy soon.
That was awesome! He wondered if the council knew he destroyed the outpost. He hoped so. He was excited. With his superweapon, they could actually win their battle with the Imperial fleet.
What was Zenobia talking about? This was a fantastic weapon. Ravens burst into flames with just a touch of its killer beam. He was tempted to leave it on all the time, but he didn't want to accidentally slice off some council toad's head or tongue. She'd been trying to distract him. Well, this time, no one was going to distract him.
It was like having the world's deadliest bowman right by his side. He was sort of yanking his own chain, wasn't he? Didn't your mother tell you it's rude to stare? Snapped Renato, a little smug. The long stairs. So he was close to the rebel base. Nothing was on fire. So far, so good. If only he had some way to break the ice. Or convince it he was a friend. He hadn't noticed that path before. As he headed towards the council chamber, Renato felt everyone watching him.
"You've saved the rebellion," said the council speaker. "Frankly, we were afraid you'd turn aside to save that idiot Lapino."
Not bloody lightly, Renato told them, feeling he was maybe being a bit harsh at the poor mad rabbit.
"If you never make sacrifices," he said, "you're probably not doing the right thing." The speaker nodded. "Are you ready to lead the charge?" "Let's roll," he said, with grim satisfaction. Renato set sail for the fleet. The Skyripper had lost its wine. It was humming now, as if it had taken some time to seat properly. He had always been irresponsible. This time, he'd done the right thing, made the hard decisions. He was a real hero. He hadn't let himself be distracted by old friends or old lovers turned enemies. Finally, he could be proud of himself.
He was ready. So was Skyripper. The Skyripper had a will of its own. It picked out its own targets and set them on fire.
This was going to be a short battle. He would set the ships on fire if he didn't need them to get to the Emperor. And he wondered if he'd see Zenobia, or if she'd flee. Wouldn't she be proud of him? At least, a bit of respect. He'd become an all-conquering hero. You never knew where the road would take you, thought Renato.
There was a parchment on a signpost. It was from her.
Every time you fire, you risk the destruction of the universe. That's insane. We surrender. A trick? Maybe she really believed it. He could hear horns blaring the retreat. Maybe it was true. Maybe they had one.
I hear black is the new dead.
Having a pet? Well, like having a goblin for a pet. There was an inscription on the platform. Balaleka lessons, with an address.
And there was Zenobia, wearing the white robes of surrender. She came and kneeled before him. Why didn't you listen to me? I was trying to save you too. You're the enemy, he said. I was never your enemy, Renato.
And he realized, not for the first time, how much she loved him.
Then she spoke a terrible word and made a gesture with her hand. She stopped moving, covered in frost, and he wondered why she'd frozen herself. Then the Skyripper froze, and then, for a moment, he felt very cold and discovered that he couldn't move. The next thing he knew, the sun was a giant, monstrously red. It took up half the sky, and he was in a parched red desert. And then he was on fire. And he hadn't learned anything new this time. He'd done the same thing twice, yet expected a different outcome. There would be a way to win. Renato could feel it. He'd have to explore choices he'd never made before he could figure it all out, though. And with that, the book's pages fluttered to the beginning once again, and he fell. The clouds parted over the Isles of Boreas. It was time to choose. The rebellion was in trouble. Ravens were scouting for the secret rebel base. They needed a game-changer. Pieces of the Skyripper had surfaced, or so a scholar in the mountains had told him. Surely the weapon that banished the lost gods could defeat the Emperor. Also, a temple had risen out of empty desert. The Iblis stone was hidden there. It was a dangerous artifact. It could corrupt its user into a bloodthirsty monster. Maybe he could find a way to use it, to take its power without surrendering to its wickedness. And also, his old friend Lupino needed rescuing. Of course, Renato had a pretty strong suspicion that Lupino had betrayed the rebellion. But could Renato really leave an old friend to the Ravens? Every child knew about the Skyripper. The Transcendent Emperor had buried its pieces. What could have brought them to light? This Emperor, Isengrim III, had once been kind, but he'd gone mad. And now he was conducting secret, obscene rituals to bring back the lost gods. Had he, somehow, summoned the long-lost components of the legendary weapon out of the deep places of the earth? It was more than Renato could fathom. But if he could find a legendary weapon, he would use it. As he set foot on the island, Renato couldn't help feeling a bit curious. Was Lupino still waiting to be rescued? No. He was probably drinking champagne with the ravens. Did ravens drink champagne? Did rabbits? Renato felt oddly thirsty, come to think of it. Why had he chosen the Skyripper? Renato never made plans that required constant vigilance. He was a hero. He didn't think too much. He just went with his gut and hoped it all worked out. The Skyripper was a long shot. He'd have to devote himself to it. No side journeys, no rescuing old friends. That was against his nature. Could he stick with it?
The eyes have had it. Renato was running out of choices. Zenobia's love brought him only sorrow. His best friend was his enemy. And the Iblis stone... Ooh, he shuddered. Best not to think about it. All that was left was the Skyripper, a weapon powered by a god's eye. So be it, then. Skyripper's Armature. The stuff that dreams are made of. Engineers' dreams, anyway.
The device was intricate. No one alive had the skill to make a thing like it. How was it part of a weapon at all? He'd have to ask a scientist. But first, he'd get the second piece. Skyripper had a heart. A core that had come to rest on the next island. Well, there was another island he could reach. Zenobia had just invaded it with her father's Raven battalions. She must be encamped there still. But fighting Zenobia now, that made no sense at all. He'd already sacrificed one friend to get this armature, was it? He didn't need to hurry to face her. She would find him. Renato asked himself why he changed course to confront Zenobia. He had no idea. Sometimes he would just do things, and he could never figure out why he'd done them. Usually, they worked out. After all, he was a hero. The truth is, though, he wanted to see her, wasn't it? It had been a dozen years since Swordfu Skul. He'd followed every rumor about her, every scrap of news. Not that he still loved her. After all, she was his enemy. No, it was solely because, know your enemy.
All right, maybe he should stop pretending. He knew exactly how she felt about him. But their love affair always ended with a tragic death. Unless, maybe he could find a way to dodge tragedy. Surely he could, couldn't he? That ought to be enough for a proper sword, he thought. fun to try out that one. And here was a handy workbench.
It looked like they'd forgotten to turn off their flamethrower.
Hey, how do you tell if someone's far away or just really small?
Renato wasn't entirely sure how he was going to capture Zenobia. She'd be expecting him. And he didn't have Lapino to cook up a clever plan. Why was it again that he hadn't got the core?
You shall not pass!
Renato slinked through Zenobia's ship, making no sound at all. Where were her guards? Finally, he reached her bedroom. She was curled up on her bed. Oh, he'd forgotten how beautiful she was. How sleek. How soft. He tapped her on the shoulder with his sword. She vanished. And he suddenly noticed he couldn't move except his mouth. In fact, soon he couldn't keep his mouth shut. He told Zenobia everything. Skyripper, the Iblistone, even where the secret rebel base was, until he was hoarse. It was some kind of truth spell. A talky truth spell. She called her father by Farspeaker Toad and filled His Majesty in.
But why didn't he get the core?
Croaked the Farspeaker in something like His Majesty's croak. Because I missed you, darling. Renato grinned. He doesn't even know why, frowned Zenobia.
That makes no sense. It's a trap,
shouted the Emperor.
I'll meet you at the outpost, and I'll bring my interrogators.
If Renato came face to face with the Emperor,
Maybe he could assassinate him. But maybe it would be smarter and safer to turn Zenobia against her father.
You're lying, she said. Somehow you're lying. The spell hadn't worn off yet. He had to tell the truth. The trick was in making sure she wouldn't believe it.
The core is perfectly safe, he said. And he tried his hardest to sound sincere.
So is the Iblis Stone. In fact, I was trying to get them myself. Fine then, interrogators it is, she said angrily. I gave you a chance.
The Emperor's interrogators were not especially gentle, even by weasel standards. Fortunately, Zenobia had locked him in the guest quarters on her ship, and she'd forgotten it had a toilet that, like all skyship toilets, could be vented into the abyss. This was not the sort of slippery fox he wanted to be. But just as they were about to land, he threw the latch, wrinkled his nose, and leapt through the open latrine. It was a short, safe landing. At least this part of the Nexus hadn't changed too much. Zenobia had been taking him to the Imperial Outpost. She'd never expect him to go there by himself. Well, maybe she would. You never knew with her. That is how we do it, said Renato to himself. Renato knew Zenobia, and Zenobia knew him. She'd suspected a trick. Now he'd vanished. She would probably guess that was his plan all along. Perfect. Maybe she wouldn't use the Skyripper. At least not without taking it to the scientists at the observatory first. Meanwhile, the Emperor would be coming to the outpost personally. This could be good. Ooh, a workbench. Did he have any jewels he hadn't tried out? He had. Renato was face to face with the Emperor's bodyguard. They looked very tough, but the Emperor held them back.
Oh, where's my daughter?
And how would I know that? Renato grinned at him.
She lured me here so that you could kill me, didn't she?
Ah, don't be ridiculous, said Renato, trying his best to sound convincing. She loves you.
Oh, I knew it. The rabbit told me I couldn't trust her.
The Emperor hopped out the door. His phalanx of bodyguards retreated carefully. Renato heard someone call, "Arrest her!" as they left. Well, that's a job well done, thought Renato. Now the fleet would be in all sorts of disarray. But maybe he could find her in the mountains. She always used to go to the mountains to hide from the world. Maybe he could even turn her against her father. Or maybe he could reap the benefits of the chaos he had sown. It was time to report to the Rebel Council, and then launch the attack on a divided and very confused Imperial fleet.
Reynardo felt very clever indeed. He told the Empire nothing but the truth, and now they suspected everything and everyone. So, why are you going to see Zenobia? He asked himself. It's not just a gloat, is it? No, of course not. Now, turning her against her father was good. It was very good. If she would actually join the rebels, that would be spectacular, right? That was definitely what he was doing. He wondered if he should have just told her the truth about her father. The Emperor had adopted her from a stray. That was the source of all her loyalty. But even then, he'd been dreaming of a bargain with the lost gods. They alone could make him immortal. The Emperor would have to seal that bargain with the life of someone who truly loved him. And who else truly loved the Emperor? But how could Reynardo tell her that now? Why would she ever believe him? Whee! There was an inscription, no spitting. Smash! The funny thing was, she should have trusted him. He told her the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Oh, all right. The truth was, he'd played her like a fiddle. And how often had he ever done that? She was so smart. Smarter than him, really. Renato had given away the location of the secret base. Fortunately, the Emperor thought it was all a trap. He even mistrusted his own daughter. Renato couldn't have done better if he'd planned it.
What have you done to me? Zenobia demanded. My own father thinks I'm a traitor. So? But I'm loyal. So what? You're a bastard, Renato, she said. Now, you love that about me. You really did want the core, didn't you? And the Iblis stone. Yep, he gloated. You get all that? She said to the far speaker toad he'd failed to spot.
I am so relieved, my daughter,
said the far speaker. And Zenobia got into her ship and flew off. Damn it. The old far speaker trick. How had he missed it? This was very bad. Zenobia back in her father's good graces, and both of them ready to use the core and the Iblis stone. He got back on the Farfarer. Briefly, Renato thought of fleeing. The odds were surely against him. Never tell me the odds, he told himself. Odds confused him. He preferred to trust his gut. And so he sailed on to attack the fleet. Alone, if necessary. There were not many rebels here, and they were disorganized. The Empire had obviously attacked the secret base, the formerly secret base whose location Renato had so helpfully pinpointed on a map. There was still time to turn around, wasn't there? But Renato hated turning around. Heroes don't turn around, they just own their screw-ups and turn them into impossible victories, right?
The portal was heavily guarded. Must go someplace they really didn't want him to go. Definitely easier to fight inanimate objects.
The mysterious sword from the east made you so fast you could catch a fly with your chopsticks. If that's what you really wanted. Stop. The odd thing was, Bernardo's personal battle was going fairly well. The Ravens immediately in front of him were no quicker or tougher than usual. Where was the power
power of the core, blasting him off into the abyss. And where was Zenobia? She must be up to something. But whatever it wasn't his problem. Not yet, anyway. It was all going surprisingly well. This was much easier than free climbing. He'd confront the Emperor. Funny that this whole war had come about because the Emperor feared death. And now it was coming for him. There was some sort of lesson there, wasn't there? At last, he came to Zenobia and the Emperor. She was sealing up a kind of squat coffin, banded with lead.
So glad you're here.
Croaked the Emperor.
You will be witness to my final victory.
That's creepy, Dad, said Zenobia. But thank you. Because of your shenanigans, we tested the core. It's really unstable. It could have blown us all up. It could, asked Renato. Anyway, we already destroyed your secret base, so we don't need a super weapon. We're just going to bury it. Do we, torture you? Or give you a medal? Sometime later, Renato got an invitation to attend the Emperor's ritual sacrifice of his daughter. They took him out of his dungeon cell and gave him all his medals to wear. A little while after that, the lost gods returned, and the sun went black, and the Emperor ate his soul. He should go back to some of the choices he'd faced before. Maybe there were new paths that had opened up, like those doors he was opening up all over the map that took him to new treasures and around his enemies. And he hadn't learned anything new this time. He'd done the same thing twice, yet expected a different outcome.